So that was a rather powerful opening. One thing we noticed, and just before we get into questions, just to let you know how we're going to conduct things, we're going to have a conversation up here, and then we'll bring some of you in for questions about the documentary, about the subject matter, and then we'll wrap up and send you on about your day. One of the things that struck me, and when I was watching a clip reel at home last night, and then watching the opening, is that your team talks about the fact that this is not meant to answer any lingering questions, but to raise questions all the way around. And in fact, towards the end of the clip, the North Vietnamese soldier who said the only people that like to argue are those who never fought. That sort of struck me. What was your approach to this particular documentary? I guess we can, Ken or Lynn, or anyway, you can start in. Feel free, just up here, you can jump in at any time. You don't have to wait for me. Okay. If you have an also point, okay, to bring in the conversation. Lynn, we'll start with you.
Crack at that. Yeah, I mean,
why did you do it?
Why did we do it? As Ken was saying, we feel it's extraordinarily important, and we feel it's unfinished business in our history that we don't really know what happened as a society. Kids do not study it in school. People who live through it know the part that they witnessed, but understanding the full context eludes all of us in our moment when we're alive right now. We don't know what's happening around the world and in other parts of our country. So we wanted to go back to the beginning and try to really understand the war from many different perspectives, American and Vietnamese. So we went around the country to find people who fought in the war, who fought against the war, who had ambivalent feelings, some people who went to Canada, just a whole wide range of American experiences, Gold Star families, families torn apart by the war, people who worked in the government, people who reported on the war and whose feelings about it evolved over time. And then we went to Vietnam and met people there who had a whole wide array of opinions about the war as well. And Vietnamese Americans here who lost their country, came here, many of them as refugees, and have to deal with layers of loss and tragedy. And it is an epic tragedy, a national trauma, something that's very difficult to understand, actually. I think all of us who worked on it would say it's the most challenging, difficult, just problem for us to solve as filmmakers, to try to make sense of this enormously complicated story. So that's what we tried to do, and we focused on people that are going to be unfamiliar to most of you. They're not bold-faced names of the Vietnam War. You will see them in the film archivally, doing the things for which they are now well known, but most of the people you get to know are people that you have never heard of. And so you can hear their stories, and you're not going to know from the beginning where they're going to end up. And as filmmakers, it was an incredible process of discovery to meet people and to hear their stories, and that's what we tried to do.
Sarah, Ken, General?
No, I agree that this was what we wanted to do. Lynn said it perfectly.
One of the other things that I also took notice is the discovery ethic. One of the things that struck me as a journalist is that you reached out to the Associated Press for a rare photo because you were trying to interview one of the subject matters, and you said, "I'll do it if you help find this particular rare photo." Talk about how you reached out to the Associated Press and what happened in that particular incident. Because it kind of shows that even we in the journalism profession weren't exactly anxious or cooperative.
I'll let Sarah answer that, but the thing I want to preface it is that we've spent 10 years on this and millions of dollars, and it's a huge sort of almost war effort of marshaling the resources and digging for the archives and doing that. And there is only one place. This is not a marketplace circumstance. This could only have been done in public broadcasting, public media. There's no other media entity that would have permitted us the time to do the deep dive. And instead of saying to the guy who challenges us, saying, "I'll do the interview, but only if you find this old photograph that I can't find," every other place would go, "Okay, well, we don't need him."
So give us a shot, Ken.
In some ways, it's actually a very charming story and really a fun way to look at what we do. But just to say that for this project, more than any film I think I've worked on, and probably can say for all of us, we found that the three major networks, all of the photo archives, the record companies, the music opened their doors and their archives to us, and permitted us to spend years really driving them crazy trying to find outtakes and full, stuff is not organized in any really great systemized way from this time, and a lot of material is cut up and in pieces and in file folders, and we had the luxury of time, and as Ken's saying, public television always has our back, and this wonderful Marine advisor who was there early was desperate to find this photograph of him that ran in magazine. We went to the Dartmouth archives in New Hampshire, pulled out every single issue of Perry Match, tried to find it, and then our researchers and producers were in the dark room with white gloves at the AP, and they found a random folder, and there was the photograph and two others, and all three of them are in the film. And that was a great moment for him. I think he has it framed at his house, and an unbelievably rewarding moment for us. But I think you can branch out from that and just say doing the archival research is our favorite thing, and we're very, very lucky to have the cooperation of every institution, every photographer, every photography house, and the three networks. So it was really a privilege.
And this particular photograph is of a moment in the Vietnam War that shows, I think, the sort of advantages of this perspective that we took, which is at this time, Philip Brady is an American advisor. His counterpart in the ARVN, the South Vietnamese Army, is an extraordinary human being that we also interviewed. And we also interviewed a Viet Cong who is on the other side of the battle that we will then propel all three into. And so what you have is somebody talking, the VSC guy from one side of a hedgerow, and they're talking about the firing that's going on the other side, and all of a sudden the real can take place, and that's what we need to have in Vietnam. Too often when we talk about it, we just talk about ourselves, and we forget there are two other countries involved, and then all of a sudden there are only two countries left, us and the winners, and we forget about the losers, and we often blame the ARVN for not fighting so well, when in fact, when you meet this ARVN counterpart, he is one of the bravest stories that we have in the film. You will be stunned by the individual heroism and bravery of this human being.
There's one.
I wanted to
Go ahead.
mention one more thing, because General McPeak is here, that his experience in working with us on the film, and also how we told the story that he told, actually ties into what you were just saying, because I will turn over to you, but you were part of the war that you were involved in. We then went to Vietnam and tried to cover from there, and archivally and through interviews, and I thought maybe you could explain from what you knew about what you saw from up here, and then what we were able to find down below, and how it all came together.
Well, I've only been involved in this for 5 years, so I mean, I was interviewed almost exactly 5 years ago. And somehow or other, just sheer dumb luck on my part, Ken and Lynn managed to bring me in to help with this or that. Airplane identification was my primary skill. No, that's not a F-100, that's an F-4, type of that.
That's true. At first, we didn't help with that.
We were pretty dumb. So.
Yes.
But my story is not important. It's really not important in the film. I'm sort of a bit player. But this film is important.
They're begging to differ over here about that your story is not important, sir.
This film is important. And I think, not only is it a magnificent piece of art, we all know about Ken and Lynn sort of being the Michelangelo and the Da Vinci of the documentary form. But important as a history, which I think will be sort of the standard history this generation will learn, because they won't read about it. I mean, some will, but in general, the broadcast of this will establish what the Vietnam War meant, what the history of it is. And it is a timeless work of history. They've been Ken and Lynn have been very careful to present all sides of the view, and in a very even-handed way. So it's just my honor, guys, to be involved with you in a small way in this effort.
Could you talk just a little bit? I think Lynn was trying to tee you up to talk about coming into our screening barn in New Hampshire and looking at the section in which you are part of a program called Misty and are finally have not just the job which you've described in an earlier section of bombing trees in contact, but in fact sort of trying to degrade the progress of material flowing down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is not a single road, but a sort of twisted, braided network of stuff. But you learned something watching our film that you hadn't understood up to that point.
Yeah, well, I really thought of myself as an expert on Vietnam. I mean, I did spend the same year Carl Morlantis was a Marine up in the north. I told Carl, he's a brilliant guy, you probably know, Rhodes Scholar, wrote The Matterhorn, which is a wonderful fictional treatment of his year there. I've told him personally that I know I saved his life several times. But that was an in-country operations. What Ken's talking about was a secret program because we weren't supposed to be operating in Laos. But the trail ran through Laos, and it's more than a road. It was a web, a network of dirt roads, and to try to stop truck traffic down that road was one of the things I was involved in. And not from 40,000 feet, Lynn. I mean, my view wasn't up here, it was down there. But it wasn't close enough to distinguish physically the features of every truck driver. And it turns out, one of the things, and there are many, that I learned in watching Ken and Lynn at work here, was that maybe half of those truck drivers were women. And I'm an old-fashioned person. I don't mind fighting with men, but I'm not really happy about the fact that probably we actually killed a lot of women. It was a revelation to me that could have happened in that war, and wasn't the only one, but it was maybe a personal.
I want to follow up on that, because one of the things that's unique, General, is that as a participant in the Vietnam War, and now having seen all of this footage and having these discussions with the team, how did it change your perspective on the war?
I didn't. Was a professional. You know, I wasn't a draftee. I was a hired gun. President says go somewhere, do something. I went and did it. When I got there, by the way, it was obvious to me that we weren't going to win. And it was obvious to everybody in the squadron. I mean, you had to be blind not to see that the Saigon regime was very unpopular with its own people. It was corrupt from top to bottom. It was trying to prevent the reunification of the country. It was seen as a manifestation by its own people, I think, of a continuation of an imperial regime, whereas in the North you had a national hero, a figurehead in many ways, which I didn't know either until you guys dug up the fact that Ho Chi Minh was being propped up by others, and that the Tet Offensive, for instance, was a big surprise to him. I mean, this documentary is full of revelations for the American people of that kind. But whether he was a figurehead and just window dressing or not, he was seen as a national hero dedicated to a course of independence and reunification, which are compelling themes. I mean, why is that hard for us to understand? We did the same thing in this country. So it was clear to me, and I think to any person on the scene, that this was a policy failure on our side. But I knew it then. And from a professional standpoint, it didn't change anything. I mean, like I say, I was a professional.
But you just raised one thing that I want, I guess, all of you to tackle, is the notion that there are a series of revelations that opened your eyes, and you were a participant. So how, as a collective, how do you think that's going to change the conversation on Vietnam?
Well, this is central. That's the $64,000 question. We came in, our writer, who's not here, Jeffrey Ward, who's been a collaborator with me for more than 35 years, who's in his 70s. I'm in my 60s. Lynn is in her 50s. Sarah's in her 40s. And most of our staff are 40s, 30s, and 20s. And all of us came with a particular sense, particularly Jeff and me, but also Lynn, with a sense that we knew what had taken place. This 10-year project was almost a daily humiliation of what we didn't know. So it became, as you see in that opening sequence, our obligation to sort of unpack, to unreel the story of Vietnam, the familiar images, and then figure out a way to repack it. And all those images you saw moving backwards, you'll see moving forward in the film that will permit you now to benefit from not the superficiality of that conventional wisdom, but what we've been able to research over the 10 years has happened. There's been enormous scholarship. We've had contact with Vietnam. We have relations with them. We were able to see their perspectives. They are as deeply divided in their country about strategy and about how you integrate the people who lost and whether those people who lost feel integrated. There's the diaspora here, as Lynn mentioned. There are lots of stuff we can actually find out about. The end of the Cold War permitted archives to be opened up and access to new materials. And so you had scholars who may not see the whole broad picture that we've tried to do, but they know their part of the story. And so we would bring them in along with General McPeak. And it wasn't just to identify the planes, it was to take his finely tuned BS meter and apply it to what we were doing. No sentimentality, no frauds, no lying, all of that. And to try to then synthesize together all of the scholarship that's taken place, all of the experiences of the people, North, South, Viet Cong, American, as Lynn described, in an extraordinary prism of different Americans, and then sort of repack it into a story that we thought we could share. And so for us, it was daily revelations, all the time. Details about Ho Chi Minh versus the guy who was actually really in effective control of the Politburo. He was important. Ho had a voice, but he wasn't the person we had. And the fact that the United States government didn't even know the name of the guy that was running things until 1966 is just incredible. And they didn't really realize then that he was the guy running things. They just heard his name. And we've got a tape of Johnson sort of kind of going, as McNamara is saying that he talked to a British historian and there is a hardliner on the Politburo named Le Duan, L-E-D-U-A-N. He spells it for the president, which is actually pronounced Les One. And he's a hardliner. And that's like saying water is wet. And Johnson just, goes, and the conversation goes on. But it is extraordinarily indicative of the kind of policy failure that General McPeak was just describing, and that isn't just a function of the Johnson administration, but of the Truman administration, the Eisenhower administration, the Kennedy administration, and the Nixon administration, and one could argue in the sort of denouement of this, in the Ford administration, that there are too many decisions being made on domestic political considerations, meaning will I get reelected, and not really important military stuff that we want to make sure that when we ask our professionals, warriors, to do their job, that they're doing it for a really good reason.
And that it's workable.
And that it's workable, yes.
So you're basically asking us to put in the old Star Wars mantra, you must unlearn what you have learned?
Yeah.
No.
Ken says that all the time.
That is exactly
exactly
true.
right.
It is forget everything.
Yes.
Because, and I would really urge everyone here, and I think General McPeak would agree, that though his sense of the ultimate reality of Vietnam, that you knew the moment you got there, didn't change, there are thousands of things in the film that help fill out the picture of what happened, without us putting our thumb on the scale and saying, oh, this person is wrong, this person is right, this view is wrong, this view is right, that we've tried to create a space, a cinematic space, in which we permit lots of different truths, because war always shares many different truths, that can operate at the same time to coexist in this film, and we've done that. And that will help you not only get the grasp the broader details of Vietnam that will hopefully replace that superficial conventional wisdom, but I hope also will permit people to begin to have the kind of conversations that Lynn was implying earlier on that we need to have about a war we have consciously ignored. We have said we don't want to talk about it. We're not going to teach it. We think it's about this. Or my own personal politics at this moment has actually determined what I should say about Vietnam, irregardless of what I felt when it was taking place. And so we have this dissonance going on in which we hope that the film will contribute in some way, shape, or form to more courageous conversations about what took place. Because let us also be very clear that the divisions that we face today, the lack of civil discourse, the inability to talk with each other, but only at each other, had their seeds planted in the Vietnam War. And so if we understand it, then we also understand our present moment.
That's an interesting assertion, Ken. You say that it wasn't planted beforehand. You don't think?
Well, division is a human thing, and I made a film about the Civil War in which we not only
that's why I bring it up.
Had big divisions, and they, we killed 750,000 people. We now believe over those arguments, but you could understand that in a modern context, if you accept our premise or our hypothesis that the Vietnam War is in fact the most important event in American history in the second half of the 20th century, that those seeds were there before, and you can always say, well, what about the John Birch Society in the 1950s, and weren't they? You can say that what the Vietnam War did to us as a country has continued in a way and is made manifest daily. And also, though we don't believe that history repeats itself, but as Mark Twain possibly said, rhymes, the rhymes of today are startling. Mass demonstrations in cities across the country, a White House in disarray, a White House concerned with leaks, a big document drops into the American public that have been stolen, hacked, if you would, by the modern parlance. Asymmetrical
You're comparing
warfare.
the Pentagon Papers with WikiLeaks?
Of course. And asymmetrical warfare, a campaign that reaches out to a foreign power at the time of a national election. I mean, that's 5 or 6 things, and there are hundreds that resonate. And this is a film that we began well before Barack Obama decided to run for president. So it resonated back then, too, when we began it, but even more so in this moment.
Interesting. I want to know, we've talked about sort of the ethos that you're helping as consumers we pick up on. We talked about your research ethic. We've talked about that perspectives may or may not change depending on what you see. But is there a game changer as you were coming along with all this research and all these years and all of this unpacking? Was there an aha moment in all of this that you said, wow, we never knew it was going to bring us to X point, and what is that X point?
We're shaking our heads because of what Ken just said. I think we all feel that there was no one single game changer. I think as Ken was speaking, I was thinking about the way we've seen, when people have seen the entire film, we've only seen 8 minutes, but it is an immersive 18-hour experience. And people will watch it in different ways because of the way that we all know people consume media nowadays. But I think what we have seen and experienced ourselves and seen when people have come in to see the film, that at least I remember one of the interns said after coming to a screening, he said, oh, I was expecting to get a history lesson and I had an experience. And so there's something about the way the material came to us and the music we were able to use and the way our editors did just an extraordinary job, our sound editors, the interviewees who were so generous with this incredibly courageous testimony, and the way we've been able to put it together. It does have this immersive feeling, and when you've watched the whole thing, you've gone through something. And if you've lived through the war, then you're kind of rearranging your understanding. Like you said, forget everything and start over. And if you didn't, this whole sort of curtain went up on the past that you didn't know, and you're like, whoa, what was back there? And now I understand it. And so that's a game changer. I mean, just the inherent
Yeah.
experience
I'll
of
ask
watching the film.
a dumb question then.
Yeah.
Because, and you talk about this, you're on camera in the first look and other
Okay.
things.
What did I say?
No, in terms of what separates this effort from the scores of previous efforts.
Well, there are not scores of previous
yeah, I
efforts.
mean,
There are
to tell
dramatic
the
films
story.
that you
Right.
listed, and to which you could add Coming Home and Deer Hunter and more recent things that have been done. But those are dramatic. Those are fictionalized
Right.
things.
I'm adding books.
The
I'm throwing
laws,
books into them.
the laws of
Yeah.
storytelling apply to fiction and documentary in the same way. We just can't make stuff up, and we haven't made stuff up. There was a tremendous documentary effort a few years after the war ended that was, of course, only on public broadcasting. Stanley Carnow's, the television series on Vietnam. But that was a different time. There was not access to Vietnam. There was not an interest in finding out what the South Vietnamese felt, nor was there all the new scholarship that reveals that. We don't want to take anything away from that. But this is 18 hours of immersive stuff. And I would say that we live in a real lazy time. We'd rather take on our TV shows bloviators who are just offering their opinion in the moment than to go to the expense of sending a crew to the place where the news is actually happening.
How do you really feel, Ken?
I know. This is it. And what it means is that those aha moments, nobody has them. No one gets enlightenment just from lightning striking. Enlightenment is actually a process that takes a lot of hard work, and it's incremental. So we think that what happened over the last 10 years for us, as Lynn was saying, and I know that Sarah would like to comment on that, that it was in the incremental thing. It's, how a pearl is made? A pearl is an irritant. It's a grain of sand in an oyster, and it just builds up, and each layer is imperceptibly added. That's how enlightenment happens. There's no aha moments where you go, oh, it was this way. It actually, if it's that, then you've probably been deceived again by the simplicity of a conventional view. So it is a series of discoveries that in their totality, if you've actually applied your attention sort of authentically and rigorously to it, produces something else. And that's what we're
about to
interested
go out to questions, but that's why I brought up the research incident earlier, because in that first look, your team talks about the fact, yes, all these wonderful news organizations were gracious to you, but there was a time when even the AP said, I don't think we can find this. And then they let you in, and then you found it.
Right. Well, they had
So
looked. They had looked.
they had to look. They looked, but they said, we don't think we can find it. But that extra effort is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Well,
It's not a knock against our good friend Gary Pruitt at AP, because he's a good friend
No,
of
no,
the
no,
club.
They've been
no.
amazing.
They've been
I think it's
unbelievable.
incredible.
They're
They're
so
good
great.
people, but just talking about that sense of digging and digging and digging, like you said, to find that pearl.
Well, it's the keeping the open mind, I think, too, of what you're not knowing what you're looking for.
Right.
So in that case, you were looking for one specific thing. That was rare.
Sarah,
a lot of
Right.
times
you're
yeah,
about
we're
to
looking-
jump
I was
in.
just in listening to Ken and Lynn and a little bit of the conversation, I think for me, and I'm in my 40s, as Ken was saying, the two things that made this project unique for all of us, and I think we're hoping the country will feel, is that this is very contentious history. So just trying to figure out the march through the history of it was more complicated than any project certainly I've worked on. But it's also a very interesting look at 3 different countries and their governments and politics. It's a film about politics, and we have been talking a little bit that none of the 3 countries, the people understood what was really happening. And that's an interesting way to think about this war, that its citizenry and its leadership were at a sort of stutter step in all 3 places, and how as you watch the 10 episodes, you're kind of waiting to hear what's happening in Washington, what's happening in Saigon, what's happening in Hanoi, and that's a subplot that I think will be very interesting to all kinds of people. We really want to reach women and men and people on the left and the right and of every age, and so hopefully there's something for everybody in the film.
Just before we go to questions, just want to, if those of you who joined us late, I just want to introduce our panel. General Merrill McPeak, who retired as Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force and a Vietnam veteran. Sarah Bothstein, who is a senior producer on the film, on this series. Sorry, Bothstein.
It's okay.
Ken Burns, of course, member of the National Press Club, documentarian, and the leader of the team here, and of course his co-producer Lynn Novick. Questions?
Ah,
We've got plenty.
thought we
Let's
would
go.
have a
We have a
few,
mic going
yes.
around.
there a
Lindsay, let's start with our veteran here. Kind of. Kevin, go ahead.
Well, first, thanks very much for coming. I love the rewind kind of thing in your opening, which all goes back to de Gaulle. And so I had a question about getting into the sort of the World War II and then the French re-establishing themselves. Can you comment on that? I did a paper when I was at the War College about the roots of Vietnam.
Episode 1 is a particularly complicated episode because it has to take it, as you saw, Kevin, from the dimensions from 1858 when the French sort of assume control of Indochina, but immediately jumps to various things. And the film has an early biography of Ho and his attempts to sort of get the attention of the United States, which are unsuccessful, and then the United States actually comes and needs Ho to help them with Japanese insurgency. So our film begins really in earnest in 45 when the OSS parachute in and begin to help and arm Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh, which most Americans don't really realize what had happened. And so, yeah, all of that sort of stuff and the way in which the Cold War is this particularly powerful magnet that pulls the natural inclinations of the United States, as General McPeak did so poetically before, away from the natural inclination, as the Roosevelt administration had just recently said, of supporting independence movements and the sort of the idea that the old colonial world was done. That was where people like to blame Roosevelt for ganging up on Churchill. That he's just trying to tell him it's over. You're going to lose the subcontinent too. I'm sorry, you're going to lose this, you're going to lose that, and all of that. And what de Gaulle does is very deftly sort of plays a hand in which he threatens that he might be forced to go into the Soviet orbit if the United States doesn't help them restore their colonies in Indochina, especially Vietnam. So this is a huge dynamic that is really important to understand, and that episode is called Deja Vu for a very good reason. All the stuff, and there's another S word that could replace that, that happens to the French, happens to us later on. And we didn't watch that, or many Americans did, and we're going, hello, and didn't see those things. So believe it or not, the general in charge of the disaster at Dien Bien Phu, Henri Navarre, says, as he becomes the 8th commander in a very short time, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. 11 years later, Ellsworth Bunker, our ambassador to South Vietnam, uses those words unaware that they had been used by Ellsworth Bunker. I mean, it is, to quote a great baseball player, deja vu all over again. But you'll see this. I mean, they start a program called Pacification, right? They decide that it's unpopular at home. Maybe we'll let the South Vietnamese do the fighting, and we'll call it jaunisement, the yellowing of the effort. We called it Vietnamization, right? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And so episode 1 is a kind of jam-packed suitcase of stuff like that.
Sir, you want to identify
Yes,
yourself?
sir. Fred Lash, Caisson vet. Wanted to ask you, during the 10 years of gathering all this material, what were the largest impediments or obstacles you had, like doors that were closed to you, and so we've got to get in there and do this? What do you recall as being the largest ones to get through to people?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think we found for the most part, actually everyone was very generous, and as Ken said earlier, because we work in public media and we had PBS and WIDA and the luxury of time, we were able to actually get in everywhere we wanted to go. Having said that, actually getting archival material out of Vietnam was a huge challenge. It took us 2.5 years to get material out of that country. That's a long time. And there were certain pieces of music that were very, very hard for us to clear. But again, we had time and we really were patient, and we are sort of famous for not taking no for an answer. And
You
when
do
I say
not
that,
want to
we
say
really,
no
we
to
really
these
don't
two
take
women.
no for an
You
answer.
do not want to say no to these two women.
And we always ask very nicely.
Usually, yes.
Almost always.
Almost always.
But
So
we're
I
very
would say, I don't want to speak for all of my colleagues, but I really think actually at the end of the day, everything we tried to get, we were able to get. And we feel very, very
There were
fortunate
people
for
that did not want to speak, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There
Good point.
are aspects of their story that they didn't want to address within the context of, and that's okay. And there is, of course, the fact that so much of the discoveries are serendipitous. And so we're following leads like you journalists do. And so it's very much the luck of the discovery that comes along. So there's, of course, we're very much aware that even at 18 hours, which must seem daunting in our age when we cannot not look down at our phones for 5 minutes, that it would be so long. But in fact, to us, it represents a blip in the material that we were able to collect, and in the totality, of course, of the human experience over those 30 years of at least of the American goalposts of
Right,
this.
and I think one of the other incredible things about working with Ken and with Lynn I've had the privilege of working with them for 20 years, we never stop researching, and we're very flexible, which I think is actually unique in what we do. So up until literally 3 weeks ago, if we found footage of Kent State very late in our project, we found photographs late, new material came in, and they both are generous and open and flexible and work with our editors and our producers, and we do want to represent as accurately and as beautifully and as well as we can. So we do work up until the very last minute. So 10 years might seem like a long time, but we felt like we were late the whole time.
Well, that raises a fun anecdote. Journalists often, we often think if we just had that one interview, maybe the story would have been that much better. You sort of went there. Was there one interview you really, really wanted that you didn't get?
No, not at all. In fact, we have met so many extraordinary people, and General McPeak, with characteristic modesty, undersells his role in this film and his importance and the observations that he makes, and his career and the seniority of the position helps provide us with important buttresses to what is a developing sort of policy sense that the general articulated much better, and I don't need to repeat. So no, and a lot of people, I think, lobbied to get in, would have loved to offer their versions. And
People lobbied to get into this documentary?
We actually, our very first meeting, production meeting outside of our own years of getting the initial funds and thinking about how to organize it, was we went to Senator McCain and Senator Kerry and John Kerry.
Vietnam veterans.
Vietnam veterans whose stories are in our film, but we said, we're going to do this, we need your help, and we're not going to interview you, because we need not to interview the other people who are still alive that are very politically active still. And we needed to just make sure that the people in our film weren't, that we didn't give a sense to our audience that they had any political axe to grind, that they were trying to burnish their image or sort of do some Monday morning quarterbacking on their own or other aspects of this story. And so what you have are direct experiences of warriors or direct experiences of war resistors and all of the shades in between.
I think, I sort of alluded to this earlier, but this first person testimony, we interviewed 100 people, 80 of whom are in the film. And the thing that really struck us, if there was an aha moment, it was the sort of integrity and honesty and courage of the people who chose to share their stories with us from all across the spectrum, to actually, think about what they went through, organize it in a way that we could understand, tell us directly in real time some very, very difficult things. Some people took really enormous risks to be brutally honest about different aspects of the war. So we have, North Vietnamese soldiers talking about the brutality on their side. That's not so often heard, or questioning whether the war was worth it. And that's not something that one hears on the public stage. And American soldiers talking about the brutality on our side and the questions of whether the war was worth it. I mean, these are, profound questions. And a Gold Star family talking about the loss of a son and brother. People were willing to go to some very, very complicated and tragic places in their lives. And, the sense of purpose that they could, by sharing that story, help us come to some larger understanding and help the country wrestle this to the ground. It's hard to really convey how grateful we are and how much we're looking forward to the country getting to know some rather remarkable people. There's a POW who has one of the more harrowing stories that we've ever encountered. And just to sit down, we spent an entire day with him because he couldn't tell his story in a normal 2-hour interview. It actually took him, 5 or 6 hours to kind of just walk through. We didn't use most of it. We used just the really sort of single moments. But that was, a privilege for all of us to be present. And I think that the people who see the film are in for a real treat to get to know some
We're getting the high side. We only have time for
remarkably brave
2 more questions, and then I have to run. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you all for being here. This has been terrific. I'm Andy Parker, and I have a question for General McPeak. What's your take on McNamara? Because it seems like he had an unbelievable amount of culpability in our deepening involvement in Vietnam.
I'm not a big fan. But let me just say, though, I think it was, we ought to throw a bouquet to the members of this club. You guys reported very accurately at the time. I mean, on the issue of, say, Saigon corruption, there were 2 or 3 articles a week in Stars and Stripes, right in country, published right under everybody's nose. I read the Stars and Stripes every morning. So it's almost as if there was a perversity here, and McNamara might have been part of it. A smart guy, but it was as though no amount of evidence could change anybody's mind. And thank you, thank the members of this club and former members who reported so courageously from the scene.
We have time for one more, and then I have to wrap it up.
I have the microphone over here.
Right here?
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay.
So I'm a journalist who's actually normally based in Kabul. And so a lot of what you're saying is sort of echoing with what we write about. And so I was sort of curious, you had said that you all had been working on this project for 10 years, which is more or less the amount of time of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Do you feel like you have any insights from the fact that it took your team 10 years to work on this and gain your insights? I mean, does that say anything about sort of the fundamental inability for people to understand what's going on as they're going through it? Now, what General McPeak just said maybe, contradicts that.
We posit that it's a 30-year period. When you say 10 years, you're correct. From boots on the ground in March of '65 to the fall of Saigon, when we're out of there, except for embassy personnel, and have been more or less out of there for a couple of years since the peace treaty is signed in the spring of '73. So it's maybe 8 years, but we would like to suggest that it's 30. I spent 5.5 years telling the story of the Civil War, which is far longer than the 4 years of the Civil War. There's no correlation. It's just for us and our team and the size of our team, our army, to assemble our material to produce the thing that we've done. But it does, because war is so reflective of who we are, it does take a lot of time and a lot of perspective. And often in the rush for the instantaneous dissemination of news, we skip a beat. I mean, Philip Graham, who used to own the Washington Post, said that journalism, as you know, is the first rough draft of history, which is wonderful. We're the folks that have to turn in the completed draft, right? It can't be rough anymore. It has to be triangulated by lots of different sources and sourced out.
Now, thank you very much. Before we get to the last question, just want to remind everybody of some things coming up at the club. As I said earlier, excuse me, today is the Army's birthday, and there'll be and Flag Day. So we just wanted to make sure we acknowledge that, because we do have members who on the rolls who have served and have been, of course, covered many conflicts. A few things on the calendar. On June 16th, we're going to welcome former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, with his new book on understanding Trump. On June 19th, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, and a headliner luncheon here. June 20th, we welcome Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel in a headliner luncheon to talk about issues happening in his city. And on June 29th, welcoming New York Times correspondent Peter Baker on his book on the Obama presidency. Last question. you often plan several projects at a time, and you were remarking backstage that you have projects booked out to 2030 something.
2030.
What's the next one?
The next one is a history of country music. And it's like the Vietnam film, going to be telling stories about people who feel, as we are very aware of today, that their stories aren't told, that we tend to be in our media culture a coastal country, country of the tyranny of bold-faced names over the so-called rest of us who are ordinary, so-called ordinary people. And so I think in the Vietnam series and then also in the history of country music, we're able to take a look at the 20th century through the eyes of people who feel that their stories aren't told, and we're interested that their stories be heard. And we're halfway through editing that. That's with a different production team. And then Sarah and Lynn and I are also working, or we're about to jump back into working on a two-part biography of Ernest Hemingway.
Before I shut things down for the morning, you have quite a few of these, Ken.
I do. I've got an entire
the traditional National Press
We'll
Club
help you. Here we go.
mug. General,
Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't know if you need another one of these, but I'm just kidding.
They're
But
beautiful.
yes,
I have a
indeed.
set.
He has a full set. So if you're ever in New Hampshire, we know where the coffee is. Thank you, and thank you for more information on all these things and other programs here at the National Press Club. Log on to www.press.org. We are adjourned.